And I wanted to remind you that we're recording this. Also, after that golf tournament, I came down with the cold. And if my voice gives away, I have a backup voice that will be arriving soon. We have a monthly newsletter comes out this Friday, the Digital Whistle. If you're not receiving that and sign up, just make sure that you put in your address book the Manufacturers Council and our email contact at mfgcouncilie.com. That'll help it get through your spam filters to the junk box. And first of all, we want to thank our major sponsor, CMTC. Cynthia Amador Diaz is here, and I was thinking that Mickey might be here as well. But thanks so much for all that you do for us from CMTC, and Cynthia has been a wealth of knowledge and advice to us as well. Do you want to go ahead and share your information, Cynthia, in the chat for people to pick up?
Oh, okay.
And also I wanted to let you know, we formed an alliance with Women in Manufacturing, WIM, and I know that Vita from CMEX is a member as well. And they're planning a Frito-Lay plant tour here in Rancho Cucamonga coming up in July. That is for manufacturers. It includes the tour, which it's interesting. They have a lot of regulations when you go on into a food facility. No buttons on your clothes, no fingernails, no fingernail polish, no jewelry, no denim, and closed-toed shoes, all of the works to be able to take that tour. So it's typical of a food processing plant. Anyway, if your manufacturer want to go, I told Vita about it. It'll be a fun time with Top Golf as a mixer afterwards. And I want to invite those who aren't to become members of the Manufacturers Council. It's easy to do that on our website. That's where we keep our event information as well. We're going to be holding some members only events this year and want to encourage you to become a member. One of our new members is supposed to be here, Michael Lumpkin. He was up at the golf tournament. I talked a little bit about the charity tournament and the sponsorships and the scholarships that we're going to be having in regard to that. So starting in about 2014, maybe 2013, Wally might correct me on this, we developed a relationship with CMTA. And as you probably all know, they are the major force for manufacturing up in Sacramento. And we're really pleased that Robert is here and Lawrence is here to tell us about what's happening in Sacramento. And I assume you'll have a Q&A near the end that we can ask questions. And so take it away, Robert.
Thanks, Molly. It's always a pleasure to be with you guys, even virtually. We always joke about the opportunity maybe at one point here in the future to do it in person, but we are at one of the busiest times of our year legislatively right now. And before I get into that, always a big shout out and welcome and appreciate my colleague Lawrence Gaden, who's a policy director for CMTA, joining us on this call today. And so what we've done and what we've done in the past is kind of go through a bill list, and what worked out really nicely this year for us is we just wrapped up our board meeting yesterday here in Sacramento, which we always take a little bit, about 20 minutes or so from the government relations perspective, to focus on some of the really key priorities of legislation and regulatory issues that CMTA has been involved in so far this year. And then we'll probably go maybe about 15-20 minutes through that, and then I think we have about 10 minutes after then for Q&A. Molly, is that that about accurate? Perfect.
That's perfect.
Excellent. So as I mentioned, to kick things off, just a quick introduction for myself. Rob Spiegel, I'm the Vice President of Government Relations for CMTA. My colleague Lawrence Gaden is one of my policy directors. Lawrence, how long have you been with CMTA now?
Almost 5 years, approaching 5 years. So,
and we could go to our PowerPoint or the PDF now, Vincent, if you wish, if you want to share your screen. There we go. Perfect. Yeah. So we'll go ahead. We did the introduction. So CMTA, we are the statewide trade association that represents California's 30,000 manufacturers in the state of California. Always pleased to represent some of the mutual membership with MCIE as well. And unlike the Chamber of Commerce, the Cal Chamber of Commerce, who represents kind of the broader business issues, CMTA is more strictly focused on legislation and regulation impacting the manufacturing sector of California and how those particular policies impact our ability to remain profitable, maintain our relevance in not only a national market, but also internationally. And we do our best to represent a sector of California's economy, which is about $300 billion worth, including an employer for almost 1.3 million Californians. And so CMTA, we've been around since 1918. And throughout our history, as I said, why we have merged with other associations like the California Technology Association in the early 90s, the focus has been exclusively on the technology and manufacturing sector of the state of California. So I always joke that CMTA, we are a small but mighty team. We definitely don't have the man and women power, if you would, of like Cal Chamber, but I feel very fortunate to have a team of 3 colleagues supporting my efforts. The 3 of us, Lawrence, myself, and Dean, are all registered lobbyists here in Sacramento. And then we are supported by our legislative analyst, Ashley Hong, who is unable to join us today, but is studying for the bar exam as she just graduated McGeorge Law School this past June. So we can go to the next slide. And then as well, we did a little bit of changing and internal type dynamics here not too long ago. We have a government relations committee that kind of oversees how we engage in particular pieces of legislation. And as a trade association, one of the questions I always get asked is, how do you take positions on bills? And it's a very informative and deliberative process that we go through with our member companies and others. And our chairman is Jim Halloran, and he is essentially the advisor and the executive that oversees the formation of our political positions from CMTA. As we also have a political action committee that helps guide the discussions surrounding our engagement and contributions for political campaigns. And then we also have outside counsel represented by Don Kepke with McHugh Kepke Padron. I'd like to say we could handle everything, but at sometimes even CMTA needs a little bit of added punch, if you will, in the legislature. Next slide. So to kick it off, and I know at least for Molly and Wally, you may remember this from the March meeting down in Palm Springs, but any given year, it's not uncommon for the California legislature to introduce more than 2,000 pieces of legislation. And I'm sure there's probably very good arguments for why all 2,100 pieces are needed in California. But with that, we do take our time in kind of identifying those specific bills, as I mentioned, that impact the manufacturing sector, perhaps more than other broader business interests in the state. And this year, I think, was a very challenging dynamic. And we're not done yet, but it was a very challenging dynamic, and where we had identified essentially about 227 bills that in one way had a nexus to the manufacturing community. And as we go through, we're not going through today all those 200 and something bills, but with that, we end up going through an internal process here where we identify some of those major priorities, if you will, and we bestow a particular title to some of those bills, being a manufacturing maker, which is a bill that is essentially supporting the manufacturing community in some way or another, and then a breaker, which is essentially the equivalent of a job killer, if you're familiar with the Chamber of Commerce titles. But the manufacturing breaker status is one that would have irreparable harm, if you will, to the manufacturing community at large. And this year, I think we had 9, Lawrence, if I remember correctly, identified breakers. Some of these were coalition efforts, but also some were ones that CMTA led directly as part of a coalition we formed on behalf of the manufacturing community at large. Next slide. One thing, and I don't think this will play, but another thing that we've started doing, and I always have to make a pitch for this, CMTA has really amped up our social media presence. And I definitely recommend that you follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, etc. Because not only are you going to get information about what CMTA is doing as like a broader association from the stories shared with manufacturers about who we represent and what they do, we also now use these platforms as a mechanism to get out information regarding legislative legislative priorities. So this is a video. Since I did not put it as part of a PowerPoint, it won't play, but definitely feel free to check that out as well. Next slide. And as I mentioned, some of the legislative priorities, and I'll pivot to Lawrence here to talk about it. We did have 3 this year, and each one of these is a priority bill for CMTA, in which it would have benefited the manufacturing sector at large. So Lawrence, I'll pivot to you.
Yeah, so I can go through these 3. I know you guys probably remember me talking about the first one. It's been a huge priority for us really over the past few years, but particularly over the past year or so. AB 52, that is a Assembly bill by Mr. Tim Grayson. What that bill does is essentially catches us up to the rest of the nation as far as our manufacturing tax climate. So basically what that bill provides is a manufacturing tax credit for any qualified manufacturing purchase. Basically, 44 of the other 50 states completely exempt the sales and use tax on any qualified manufacturing purchase. So if you're a manufacturer building a facility and anywhere in California, which, particularly for us is a little more troublesome because depending on where you are in the state, that tax rate, that sales and use tax percentage can go up to nearly 11 and almost 12%. I think for you guys, it's kind of floating around that 9-10% figure, which essentially double taxes production, which is something that we never want to do, and obviously something that we don't want to disincentivize the further growth of manufacturing. We really want to catch us up. We're the #1 manufacturing state. We innovate and kind of come up with all these great ideas. We struggle to produce them here in California. And this bill was really kind of our biggest effort to combat that. We've gone through several cycles of this bill. The previous cycle was vetoed by the governor during our year. We had some budget surplus. This current version of the bill, we're actually going to have some more activity going on with this one in the month of August. This one is sitting in suspense in the the Senate Appropriations Committee. So all of those bills in the last month or so of the session, once we get back from recess next month, will be heard and will be addressed. We have some amends kind of in works to make this more palatable. Obviously, it's a very tough budget year for us. So, getting credits, getting kind of any extra incentive through for business will be really challenging. But I think we've done a great job in really, clearing out and kind of showing folks the importance of this and kind of how much it can catch us up to the production rates of other states and really kind of help onshore our businesses versus offshoring them in a lot of good ways or in a lot of ways. So more to come on this bill, but like I said, that one's up in Senate appropriations on the suspense file. So we'll have some more action on this one once we get back from recess next month. And then I could jump right to the next one, AB 2400 by Luz Rivas. That bill is essentially an extension of a very impactful program, the CATFA program, which is California Alternative Energy and Transportation Financing Authority Act, and its sales and use tax program for manufacturers. So basically, if you're found to be a manufacturer that is making any type of clean air or alternative energy use, you were provided a sales tax exemption, which would expire at the end of this year. We're setting to kind of re-up on that program. Really impactful for a good chunk of our manufacturers. Some data through this has found over just this past year alone, it created 5,000 new jobs, stimulated nearly $2 billion in economic activity. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, in a really, really tight and, hard budget year, any additional manufacturing incentive, any business incentive for that matter, is really tough. And this one has a kind of a baked in cost of $150 million a pot for the program. And, obviously in a tight year that money was getting kind of looked at as a way to help solve our other issues. So that bill was held on suspense. We'll definitely have some more efforts going on in the coming years to kind of fortify that program and get that program back on the books. And then the final maker that we have is AB 2922. That is an Eduardo Garcia bill, is actually up in Senate local government next week on Wednesday, last day for policy committee hearings until we go into recess. And what that bill is basically an extension of the CIIP program. That's the Capital Incentive Investment Program. Something that's actually particularly impactful to folks in your area, Imperial Valley, Inland Empire. What that does is basically a manufacturer who spends, $150 million upwards of a qualified manufacturing facility, they would receive a tax abatement for the qualified purchase. This bill is really kind of aimed at getting some provision and uniformity to the program, and really an extension of like I said, another additional incentive that manufacturers can use to really locate operations. As I said before, it's really particularly impactful to our folks in the lithium space, and really our larger manufacturers just in the Imperial Valley, Inland Empire area. More to come on that one. We've taken some amends to make that a little more palatable on the labor side, but yeah, just a simple extension of a program that's been really impactful in some larger some larger manufacturing facilities and some larger new projects going on in the state. But that one will be up next week on the 3rd, as I mentioned, in Senate Local Gov. So still moving and still active on this bill kind of as we go forward. But those are the 3 big makers. Happy to take any questions or concerns. I know tax policy and that stuff can get a little wonky, but happy to answer any questions or concerns you guys might have. So I see we got one with Wallace.
Yeah, Lawrence, on that manufacturing tax credit, do we get, or will you get, how effective, let's say it passes, and there's a, what will it be like? Does the bill give some discretion to the governor or somebody to tailor it based on the economy or the state budget? Is there any tailoring to it? I mean, that was what they talked about in Palm Springs when you had their meeting down there, was that there would be an escape, so that if we were in a year with a deficit budget, then there wouldn't have to be a tax credit. Is that still?
Yeah, so that's kind of the mechanic we're using for our most recent amends. We actually have the language not in print yet, but working on that to get that done in September. So basically what it would be is yeah, as you mentioned, kind of an on and off switch at the discretion of the governor, at discretion of DOF, really to make the credit available to manufacturers, kind of based on where we're at fiscally with our budget. So obviously this year might not be the best year, but moving forward, we want to get it on the books, just to kind of have that optionality for DOF and the governor to kind of get that on the books and then kind of move from there. But yeah, you have it spot on. That's kind of the next steps for the bill.
I see. Well, then my question is there any data collection available, in other words, to see how effective, once the bill is passed, if there is a tax credit for manufacturing purchases, will there be any data that comes out that could be useful to say the effectiveness of it? So did it really incentivize? How much incentive was utilized or taken? How much credit? That would be nice to know if that happens. Okay, that's what I'm saying. So some of the bills in the past, we were involved with the enterprise zone, which had a tax credit involved on purchases, and but I could never get data as to, well, how effective is that in the state, or how much tax credit is given out. It would be nice to know if the data side of it can be made available.
Yeah, well, we did run last year. We ran an outside economic analysis to show the full economic benefits of the bill, which they, ranked in the billions, juxtaposed to I think it was a $300 million estimated cost to the state. And it's important to note, it's kind of hard to forecast exactly how much we paid out, because it's all based on the idea of, investment. A manufacturer is not getting this credit until they make a significant investment, go through their process for the year, and then on the back end, when they're filing their taxes, they will get that credit. So it's kind of hard to pin down an exact number, but we do know, if this gets on the books, it'll be, largely impactful for manufacturers, and honestly, I think the offset cost of the state will be negated, and larger economic activity and job creation as well. But hard to pin down an exact number on what will be dolled out, because like I said, it's all based on investment and the appetite for investment from our manufacturing community. So.
Right. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you, Lawrence. Anything else for Lawrence before we move on to the next set of bad bills? It's where we should have some like ghost music or something going. We can go to the next slide. Perfect. So as I mentioned, there are also bills, while we support many at CMTA, we also have to defend the sector and the manufacturers in the state from potentially devastating consequences of overly aggressive legislation. And this year was no exception. As I mentioned, I think we had 9 breakers, which is by far the most that I think CMTA has seen in probably well over a decade. But with that, we'll just briefly talk about some of these and go through them, but without too much detail. But one of the biggest issues, and this was a national issue that took on national significance, was the defeat of SB 903 or Senate Bill 903. And I'm sure that we all know of the issues surrounding PFAS or PFAS. To what we call a forever chemical. It's present in manufacturing. It's present on clothing. It's present as part of solutions that are, insulation for wires, and part of like medical devices, as well as for use on semiconductors and lithium batteries. The real problem with a statewide prohibition on any and all products containing PFAS is that it quite literally will impact every single product within the state of California. If you look at your computer, if you look at any of this that we're using today, essentially what SB 903 would have required is for the manufacturer of my computer, you'd essentially have to go to the state agency to ask for an exception to have your product sold in California. With the millions of products that we have in the state, it was simply just unbearable for the challenges that we face. If you think of airplanes, you think of anything else that are, heavily and complex type products. Literally thousands and thousands of internal components would have had to go through the same process. It's not to say that other states haven't done this program. Minnesota, Maine, Vermont all have similar programs. But in terms of the impact that it would have had on California's economy, Senate Bill 903 was definitely it was for very good reason, not only a Cal Chamber job killer, a CMTA manufacturing breaker, it was also a California Building Industry Association housing killer. And so for the first time in probably 10 years, each one of the major associations in California teamed up to defeat this bill. The coalition was over 150 organizations and businesses strong. We were able to defeat it in the Senate Appropriations Committee. We do envision that SB 903 will be back in some form next year, but at least for this year, we don't have to worry about it. It was a big national win that carried through both through the Washington Post, New York Times, LA Times, and so many other publications when this bill was finally defeated. But Lawrence, I'll go back to you for the other two.
Yes, the other two breakers that were big ones that are already dead this year. SB 1345, a huge one in the labor space. We were able to get this one killed relatively early in the process. What this bill would have done is basically banned criminal background checks during the hiring process. And working with the author, their goal was really disclosure of when background checks were being used and kind of how they're being used. That was absent in the language of the bill and really kind of the mission of the bill and how it played out. And obviously we have a lot of folks who, our manufacturers have cleared employees, concerns with sensitive info. We have folks in the intelligence community, even for, folks who have utilized non-cleared employees. There's just some concerns on, some of the information they had. We were able to get, like I said, to get these concerns, well known amongst membership throughout the early portion of that process. And we were able to get this one killed early on in the Senate Judiciary Committee. But yeah, really tough one would have been criminal background checks during the hiring process, something that I don't think at any level of manufacturing would have been ideal. Then the next one was a really, really bold idea. SB 1434, by Mr. Razzo. We were able to get this one killed in labor. What this bill was really a comprehensive UI, unemployment insurance overhaul. So you guys might remember there was a bill last year, SB 799 was a bill last year. It was by Portantino, was basically awarded UI to workers who were on strike after 2 weeks. And that one kind of motivated by the quote unquote hot labor summer. A lot of the labor strikes that were going on last year, ultimately vetoed, citing, one, just the cost. We're about 20 billion in debt in our UI fund, and that's only going to grow significantly over the next few years, and this would make that grow even more. But the bill got vetoed last year. This bill does everything that bill does, provide striking workers with UI benefits for 2 weeks, as well as creates a taxable wage-based increase. Also adds in some more excluded workers funds, some more pools for pool of money for employers to kind of chip in on, basically. But just on that taxable wage-based increase, which is really a tough part for us. Just for a little background, the state UI program is financed by employers who pay UI taxes on the first 7,000 in wages paid to each employer or employee, excuse me. California is one of the lowest rates. This bill was, didn't even, the language of the bill, it actually didn't even put a figure. It just wanted to rise it, didn't know to what exact level, but there was an appetite to raise that taxable wage-based increase. As I mentioned, a really bold idea that, not only kind of set some different precedent in as far as labor standards, but also really, worked against our $20 billion debt that we are trying hard to lower as an employer community, as a manufacturing community. So we're able to get this one killed. And also just tangent, the predecessor, the successor to that Portantino bill, SB 1116, just died yesterday. So we're able to get both of the big UI overhaul bills kind of out of the way for this year and good and dead moving forward.
Perfect. Thank you, Lawrence. We can go to the next slide. Got about 5 minutes or so, it looks like. So California would be, one back, please. California, I'd be remiss if I also didn't say that California also from time to time has really bad, overly aggressive environmental type bills. And it's not to say that in any way California Manufacturing Technology Association is against environmental sustainability and environmental consciousness, if you will, but at times some of this goes a little overboard. And 1497 was clearly one of those that would have essentially assessed a carbon tax based on how much emissions were coming from a facility. So if you had a factory in California that emitted a certain ton of emissions, you would be assessed essentially a dollar figure tax on those emissions coming out of your smokestack. This was actually a discussion from about 20 years ago. When I was a staffer in the building, that was one of the first discussions we had, creating what we now call California's cap and trade program. This idea, at least 20 years ago, was a bad idea. It was reinforced not too long ago, a couple months ago, that it is still a really bad idea. And therefore, with the help of Cal Chamber and many others, Senate Bill 1497 was defeated in the Senate Appropriations Committee this past May. And then I'll go back to Lawrence real quick for 1321 as well.
Yes, SB 1321, that's a bill by Senator Wahab. Essentially kind of overhauls the ETP program. For those aren't familiar, that's the Employment Training Panel. Employers and manufacturers at large pay a tax that goes into this panel, and what that panel does is provides funding that manufacturers can apply, manufacturers and employers at large can apply for, and it provides training funding that can help upskill and really kind of transform some jobs and transform the skill set of some of their employees. They're really impactful programs and found really impactful over the years. For every $1 that's spent in ETP training, about 4 goes back into the economy. So it's a really useful program. What this bill does, what this bill is doing, essentially adding DAS standards, as Division of Apprenticeship Standards, to the ETP program, which shifts a lot in the criteria, which ultimately kind of drives a huge portion of our manufacturing base out. And manufacturers are the biggest benefactors of the ETP program at about 40%. So the DAS standards puts in a bunch of stuff surrounding kind of the high road measurements. And we always argue that manufacturing is about as high road as you can get for an employer. But yeah, this one really overhauls the program that manufacturers, like I said, one of the largest benefactors, but also one of the largest kind of, they chip in at the largest amount as well. So more to come on that bill. It's actually set next week in Senate, or excuse me, at Assembly Labor. So more to come on that, but we're working this one really hard with a large business industry coalition, kind of making sure folks understand the true process and kind of the true benefits of ETP and kind of how mechanically this works for the manufacturing community, and just how some slight tweaks in which they think, will kind of make, the high road jobs more favorable can actually kind of push them out and push that base of folks who are not only funding the program, but also benefiting the program out of it as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Lawrence. And then one of the other bills that we've actually just recently gone to neutral on after getting our amendments in the Senate Utilities and Energy Committee last week, AB 2083 would have set in statute a emission reductions percentage standard for all industrial sources of emissions in the state. This would have required by the year 2045 every California industry or manufacturer in the state to achieve an 85% reductions of your emission through only the use of zero emission or fully electrified manufacturing equipment. We were able to modify that bill to such an extent in the Senate Energy Committee that CMTA has now moved to neutral on that particular bill. But that was one that would have had profound impacts to the sector at large, not just manufacturers, but everything from those manufacturing semiconductors to oil and gas to quite literally any brick and mortar facility that has, I'll say, that emits any substance in the state of California. That was a big win for us as an association as well. We can go to the next slide. And then the other two bills, I can skip over 2515. It's kind of in the weeds. The thing that one of the elements, though, that we're concerned with in this particular bill is that manufacturers can only control what they can at the moment of manufacturing, meaning the chemicals, the products that we put into it. Given the prevalence of PFAS in the environment, AB 2515 is about expanding liability for manufacturers beyond what we can control at the factory level. So if we are preventing or we are not putting PFAS into a product, which is totally fine by us, we should not also then be held responsible for what we would call trace contaminants that come in through some other mechanism. The bill originally had a private right of action in it as well, which would allow essentially any Californian to sue a manufacturer for a violation under the bill. We recently got that amended out of the bill, but we still have significant problems. And then a bill that just died today was Assembly Constitutional Amendment 16. It was about a 14-word constitutional amendment that would have gone to voters this November. It would have enshrined the right of clean air, clean water, and a clean environment to every Californian in the state. While that's not necessarily a bad idea, it didn't go far enough in actually identifying what any of those rights actually meant. And given the litigious environment of California, those constitutional rights could have been interpreted very different ways. And as such, it was better to fight this bill instead of allowing the courts to essentially make a determination. And let's keep in mind as well, folks, California's environmental regulations are some of the strongest on the planet, and even CEQA, to our endangered species protections, are deemed to be like the gold standard on a national and international level. So in many ways, ACA 16 was unnecessary, but it was definitely going to be an impactful issue, not only for manufacturers, but for pretty much every private citizen in the state of California. I know we have maybe 2 minutes left, Molly, and then I'll stop if that's okay with you. We could skip over the next 2024 advocacy, but there we go. Let's do that one. So CMTA, and I'm not going to talk about all of these. I'll talk about these very broadly. We're not just a legislative advocacy organization. We also represent and we take our time and efforts to the regulatory level as well. And one of the things in which our members have communicated to us time and time again is sometimes the legislation is bad, but the regulatory activities that stem from that previous legislation or that past legislation sometimes is even worse. Oftentimes a bill will say, CARB, we want you to do X. And then when CARB tries to implement X, it is done on a level that is greatly impactful to the entire business and manufacturing community. And so over the last 3 years, CMTA has really shifted our activity as well to doing battle, if you will, with the state regulatory entities. California Air Resources Board, I've had the privilege, if you will, if you want to consider that, or maybe the pain and suffering of working with that agency for almost 20 years on various pieces of regulation. At times we've been successful. We've made these at least somewhat better, but they still remain very challenging. Just today, CARB, I believe, is set to approve the zero emission forklift rule. So every forklift now, beginning in 2026, will have to be battery powered in the state. That'll be one that definitely impacts manufacturers and others. We were able to get some flexibility for it, but it is still a very problematic program. We're also involved as an association in doing battle, and I really shouldn't use that, being collaborative, if you will. At the California Public Utilities Commission, the CPUC sets energy rates. If you are really interested in knowing where we are in terms of our energy rates in California, the industrial sector pays the highest rates in the nation for our energy, about 125% above the national average. I think as well, just overall energy rates in the state, I believe we are first or second in terms of the broader energy rates as well. That would be for your residential and commercial industries. And then we also are committed, though, to environmental sustainability and recycling. And one of the things in which CMTA continues to work on is implementing Senate Bill 54, which was about the reduction of plastic waste and essentially garbage in California. This will be a massive undertaking with billions of dollars in investment that was passed by the legislature in 2022, being SB 54. And so for the past 2 years, we've been working with CalRecycle on the regulatory implementation of that particular program. What we call is extended producer responsibility. If you put a product into the market as a consumer, as a producer of that product, you bear the responsibility then of ensuring that that product is recyclable. We go through an entire mechanism there in which industry will pay for some of the cost of recycling in that operation. But given our commitment to sustainability and environmental protection, it's something that we as an association and our members feel very strongly about. And therefore, we continue to spend a lot of our time as well working with the agency at CalRecycle. I think generally we'll just go to the very end and talk about what one more. Perfect. The last thing that we'll have is maybe last year, you'll remember, I talked a lot about kind of this climate accountability and reporting mechanism with Senate Bill 253 and 261. We still have many problems with that. It's about a $30 million program ultimately that will be run by the California Air Resources Board. We do anticipate some cleanup language to that. It won't be earth shattering, so there will still be impacts to the sector. That'll likely come out in August. We do have another PFAS enforcement bill that we are currently fighting now. I'll leave it at that. We don't know what's going to happen with it yet. We anticipated up until recently some ballot initiative interference from the legislature. We had the California Taxpayer Protection Act that essentially would have required the legislature to approve any tax increase promulgated by a local agency or the state. That was overturned by the Supreme Court, so it will not be on the ballot. It's very precedential in that the Supreme Court now is determining what initiatives can and cannot be on the ballot in California. I imagine there will be further litigation on that. And then the last thing is we anticipate some major energy program realignment this summer. We have about 3 agencies that are involved: California Energy Commission, California Public Utilities Commission, and CARB. In some form or another, some of their programs, if you will, and responsibilities will likely be shifted as part of a major overhaul that may even include some CEQA streamlining as part of it. But with that, I feel we are at time, Molly. I am happy to stop. Definitely appreciate the opportunity to give a little bit of update on what's happening in Sacramento, and happy to take any questions if there are any. And thank you, Lawrence, as well for adding your expertise on the tax, labor, and employment issues as well.
Of course.
I was curious, I wanted to ask, maybe go back to Lawrence on the criminal background checks, 1345.
Yes.
I thought it was, you briefly indicated that you went back to the authors, and I thought that was very interesting as one of your tactics that you use to go back and work on something with the authors. Can you explain a little bit more about that?
Well, I mean, some stuff is, it's not as much working with as kind of letting them know what we're going to do. But for that one, yeah, we tried to discuss and learn the intent of what they were doing, kind of just voice our opinion, voice our concerns as business industry. And she kind of made it clear what they were getting at in that bill is, the disclosure of how we're using those background checks, but that was missed in much of the bill. And even after we explained the impacts kind of directly to our manufacturers, they, kind of still missed that. So then that's when we went ahead and made more deliberate steps in getting that one out. But yeah, we, of course, whether it's a bill we support or oppose, we always give the author the courtesy of reaching out, kind of letting them know our concerns, seeing if there is an avenue to, as Robert mentioned, to not just combat, but to collaborate. And if there's not, then we'll go ahead and kill it. But we took that first step and wasn't as fruitful as we liked. So we moved forward with our strategy.
We have Michael Lumpkin. I don't mean to put him on the spot with ProLift with us. And I'm sure he was interested to hear about all of the forklifts being converted to electric within a short time period. That's a major part of what they do. Michael, if you're there, you want to say anything, go ahead and jump in.
Yeah, actually, we've been kind of monitoring that. One of our guys here brought it to our attention a month or so ago, and we have some older lifts, and we're debating if we're going to invest in fixing them up, if we're just going to wait and see what happens if we have to buy a new one. So that's definitely something we are keeping our eyes on.
It's going to be I think a challenging regulation. I mean, for us internally as an association, a lot of the manufacturers that we represent in the companies have already been kind of on a trajectory of phasing out what we could call like large spark ignition or propane forklifts. These could be because of various rules within an air quality district or what have you, but it still requires a degree of investment beyond just the initial vehicle to also the charging infrastructure and the availability of energy, as well as the cost of that energy to be delivered to that site. And so working through the regulation, and by far it is not perfect. We are not supporting the regulation as currently drafted. We were able to get some considerations there that would essentially allow a facility or an operator of a forklift some additional time based on the availability of the model of forklift that they're wanting, whether or not energy was delivered to the site as well in a timely manner, or essentially like re-engineering an entire facility would be one of the exemptions. It's not an exemption, it's an extension as well. And so prior to our engagement, none of that mattered. It was simply by the year 2027 or 2026, you had to phase out a forklift that was about 10 years old. So if it was a model year 2016, it was gone. And if you hadn't taken the steps to really go into the process of trying to either convert or find a new one, you were simply losing your ability to operate that vehicle with the exception of some very limited type circumstances. The flexibility is what it is on all of these zero emission vehicle type issues, whether it's advanced clean trucks, which are the heavy duty vehicles, or advanced clean cars. We always try to find a middle ground with CARB, knowing full well that the agency is likely going to implement the rule at the end of the day. It's about how do you find the flexibility or the collaborative nature to actually help in some way make the regulation perhaps slightly better. And I always talk in terms of flexibility and cost effectiveness. Are we doing it in a way where our engagement is trying to limit the impact that this particular legislation or regulation may have on our industry at large, knowing the commitment that California has made to not only zero emission vehicles, but also climate change as a whole.
I'll just add that I was really impressed. And I want to say congratulations for the work that you've done on the ones that you killed. That was pretty exciting, actually. And I know you have a great team. Can you explain, do you have different groups of people working on specific things?
Great question. So my expertise, I oversee our team as the most senior of lobbyists, I guess, for the organization, even though Lawrence has a longer tenure at CMTA than I do. My expertise has always been in the natural resources, climate, air quality, energy type space. And I generally, I will say, have that silo, if you will, at CMTA. I also do a little bit of the AI and technology type stuff. Lawrence, I'll let you talk about what you do specifically for the organization, then I'll talk about Dean and Ashley.
Yeah, so I cover the labor and employment space, which is really big, obviously, the tax space, the economic development space, and I do some work with our pharmaceutical members as well.
And Lawrence left out a big one, and I won't call you on it, but career technical education, workforce development is something that we continually hear from our members. And Lawrence is really involved in outside organizations and associations, affiliations with that too. My colleague Dean Talley and Ashley Hong. Ashley and I split the like artificial intelligence type side of it and the technology side, as she's not a lobbyist. And then Dean is also in the natural resources space. As you can imagine, there are many, 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 many bills in that space, and I simply do not have the bandwidth to do it all. But Dean does a great job with the energy and natural resources, but he's also our lead on anything in the autonomous vehicle technology space as well. So he's been our point of contact there for any of the AV type discussions that continue to happen in the state.
Wondering if there are any other questions out there. I have a feeling we were impacted by that thing tonight, that supposed debate tonight that's coming up. So I imagine everybody's anxious to go watch that. So thank you so much, both of you, Robert and Lawrence, for being here today. And it's always, I think it's always very interesting to hear what's going on. And we love the work that you're doing.
Great. Thank you, Molly. And to whatever extent that we can be helpful in the future, we definitely appreciate the partnership that we have with you and MCIE. And we're always a resource and happy to be a resource to your membership as things continue to heat up, no pun intended, as we're going to be looking at 110 here next week. But very happy to be of service to you and all of your members as well. And we'll try to keep doing what we're doing best.
Thank you so much. That's a wonderful offer. And we very much appreciate you. Well, thanks everybody for coming tonight. Have a great weekend and a wonderful 4th of July celebration next week. So take care, everyone.